April 1944, Krakow, German-occupied Poland. His name was Mikhail Ferencz, Misha, as his mother had always called him, 24 years old, born in the winding Jewish quarter of Kazimierz, where the synagogues once sang on Friday evenings, and the smell of his grandmother's coolant filled every stairwell. That world was gone now. What remained was smoke, cold stone, and the sound of boots. He pressed himself flat against the wall of a crumbling bakery on Zoroka Street, his breath shallow, his heart beat a treason against the silence. The April air was deceptively mild. A cruel joke, he thought, that spring should still come when so much had been taken. Somewhere above the rooftops, a column of black smoke curled upward from the direction of the ghetto. It smelled of burning wood, of something else too, something he had learned not to name. Two Wehrmacht soldiers rounded the corner 20 meters ahead. Their boots rang against the cobblestones like hammers on an anvil, a sound Misha now heard even in his sleep. He did not move, he did not breathe. His fingers found, instinctively, the folded paper in his coat pocket, a letter from his sister, Rivka, written 8 months ago, before she had been taken east. He had memorized every word. He carried it anyway. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening to this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments right now, and let's see which corner of the world has the most War Legend fans. Don't just scroll. Type it out. Your comment might get featured in the next story. The soldiers passed. One laughed at something. The sound floated up into the smoky air and dissolved. Misha exhaled. Every shadow in this city could mean death. Every uniform, every whistle, every barking dog in the distance, all of it was architecture built for one purpose, to erase him. But he was still here. He told himself that mattered. He was still here, and while a man still breathed, he could still choose. He pulled his collar up and moved east, toward the river. He was caught 3 days later. Not by soldiers, by a neighbor. A man named Bogdan, who had once borrowed shoulder from Misha's father and never returned it, who now wore the comfortable expression of someone doing the city a service. He pointed from across the street. He did not even use words, just a finger, and a nod toward the 2 SS men at the checkpoint on Starwy Street. They took him roughly. One struck him across the ear before he had even opened his mouth, and the world tilted sideways, ringing. His papers, forged, painstakingly assembled over 3 weeks by a printer named Henrik, who was now dead, were examined for 6 seconds and discarded. It didn't matter what the papers said. It never had. He arrived at Płaszów concentration camp on a gray Tuesday morning, wedged into a transport truck with 31 other people, pressed together so tightly he could feel the fear radiating from their bodies like heat from a furnace. An old man beside him was praying quietly in Hebrew. A young woman clutched a child's shoe, just one, as though it were the most precious object in the world. Perhaps it was. Misha learned this on his first day from a prisoner named Zlomo who had been there 11 months and had the eyes of a man much older than his 30 years. Walk fast, but never run, Zlomo told him. Running makes them curious. The camp was hunger and cold and the arithmetic of survival. Roll call at 4 in the morning, regardless of rain, regardless of frost, standing at attention while the guards counted and recounted as though the number kept changing. The food was a gray liquid they called soup, which contained, most days, only the idea of nourishment. Men grew thin with a terrifying speed, as though the camp were consuming them from within. The commandant, Eamon Goth, was known to shoot prisoners from his villa balcony for amusement. Misha learned to make himself invisible, to be present without being seen, to exist in the peripheral vision of cruelty without entering its focus. But in his coat pocket, against his chest, Rivka's letter remained. "Come home," she had written, not knowing that home no longer existed. "Come home, Misha. Whatever it takes. Come home." He read it each night until the light failed. Then he lay in the dark and made himself a promise. It began with a fence and a dead man's coat. The dead man was Yakov, a carpenter from Wawau who died of typhus in the 3rd week of May. He was approximately Misha's build, and before the body was collected, Misha removed the coat, a practical, loveless act that he performed without ceremony, because ceremony was a luxury that belonged to another world. The coat had a split lining. Inside the lining, Misha began to hide things. His alliance was small, deliberate, and fragile as glass. Shlomo, who knew the rhythms of the camp the way a sailor knows the sea, when the guards changed, which watchtower was manned by a man who drank, which section of the eastern fence was inspected least frequently, Slow-mo had been mapping the camp in his mind for nearly a year. He had never acted on it, he said, because he had nowhere to go. But Misha had a name, a Polish farmer named Tadeusz, who lived 7 kilometers east of the camp and who had hidden Jews before. A fact whispered to Misha by Henryk the printer in the final conversation they ever had. The third number of their small conspiracy was a woman named Dora, a former schoolteacher from Warsaw who worked in the camp kitchen and had access to things: a knife, a small compass no larger than a thumbnail, 3 days' worth of bread hidden beneath a loose floorboard under her bunk. Dora was calm in a way that Misha found almost frightening. She did not seem to be suppressing panic. She seemed to have simply decided with the precision of a mathematician that panic was not useful. "The guard on the eastern tower," she said one evening, their voices barely above breath. "His name is Richter. He has a wife in Munich and a photograph of her that he looks at every night around 11. When he looks at the photograph, he looks down. That is our window. It is approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not enough," Slow-mo said. 4 minutes is what we have, Dora replied. The moral weight of it pressed on Misha constantly. There were others in the camp he had come to know. The old rabbi who gave what comfort language could still provide. A boy of perhaps 16 named Lev, quick and thin as a wire, who reminded Misha painfully of his younger brother. He could not take them all. He had told himself, in the cold logic of necessity, that he would take no one beyond their 3, that more bodies meant more noise, more risk, more likelihood that none of them survived. He had made this argument to himself a dozen times. He still woke at night with Lev's face behind his eyes. They chose the night of June 2nd. The moon would be new, absolute darkness. A summer storm had been building for 2 days, and Misha prayed to a god he was no longer certain was listening that it would break that night and cover their sound. It broke at 10:30. Rain came down in walls. Misha moved first, low against the ground, across the open space between the barracks and the eastern perimeter. The earth was mud beneath his hands and knees. The rain was cold and relentless, and he was grateful for every drop of it. 30 meters. 20. The watchtower light swept in a slow arc. He counted the rhythm during the preceding nights, 4 seconds of exposure every 18 seconds, and he moved in the darkness between sweeps. He reached the fence. Wire, 2 meters high, strung in 3 horizontal rows, with a gap at the base where the ground had softened and shifted. Slow-mo had found it 2 weeks ago. During 3 consecutive nights, he had worked the lowest wire loose with a stolen piece of metal, always restoring it to apparent integrity before dawn. Misha felt for the wire now in the dark, his fingers finding it by memory. His hands were trembling, not from cold. He pulled the wire up, pressed himself into the mud, began to move through. Halfway under, his coat caught. The split lining, packed now with bread, the compass, the letter, snagged on a barb. He could not move forward, could not move back. The watchtower light began its arc. He tore the coat free with a sound that seemed to him catastrophic. The barb opened a long cut across his shoulder. He did not feel it. He was through the wire and moving into the darkness beyond the perimeter before the pain arrived. Then he was in the trees, and he stopped, and he pressed his back against a pine trunk and listened. Behind him, the camp, the lights, the rain on the wire. No alarm, no dogs, not yet. He waited 4 minutes in absolute stillness, counting his heartbeats. Then Dora was through, then Slow-mo, the old man breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side. They said nothing. Dora touched Misha's arm once, a brief, precise communication, and then they moved north through the trees. The dogs came 20 minutes later. They heard the baying in the distance, directionless through the rain, and they ran. Misha ran with his shoulder bleeding into Yakov's dead man's coat, through undergrowth that tore at his legs, across a shallow stream that was rising with the storm, cold enough to make his feet go numb within seconds. Slow-mo stumbled, and Misha caught him without breaking stride. They ran until the sound of the dogs was swallowed by rain and distance and the sheer roaring volume of the storm. At some point, he could not have said when, the baying stopped. They walked the remaining 4 kilometers in silence. Misha navigated by compass, by instinct, by the occasional gap in the cloud cover through which a star was briefly visible. He thought of nothing. He allowed himself to think of nothing. Thought was a door he would open later, when there was somewhere safe to open it. Tadeusz's farm appeared out of the dark like a rumor, a low shape. a light in a single window. Misha knocked on the back door with 3 slow knocks as a Heincheck had told him. A long pause. Then the door opened. They stayed in the root cellar for 11 days. Tadeusz was a widower, a broad-shouldered man of 50, who spoke very little and communicated primarily through the food he passed down through the cellar hatch twice a day. Black bread, potatoes, once a small piece of hard cheese that Misha ate so slowly it seemed almost devotional. His wife, Tadeusz explained on the first morning, had hidden a Jewish family in 1942. She had been shot for it in the autumn of that year. He had continued anyway. He said this without drama, as though explaining a farming practice. Why? Dora asked him, and Tadeusz considered the question for a long moment. Because she would have, he said finally, and went back upstairs. The cellar was dark and smelled of earth and old turnips. Misha's shoulder wound became infected and then slowly, with Dora's careful attention and a small bottle of iodine Tadeusz provided, began to heal. The physical healing was simpler than the other kind, which did not begin at all in those 11 days, and perhaps would not truly begin at all in those 11 days, and perhaps would not truly begin for years. He had nightmares of the camp. He had nightmares of Rivka. He lay awake and catalogued, compulsively, the faces of everyone he had left behind. The rabbi, the woman with the child's shoe, Lev with his watchful quick eyes. He did not know what had happened to them. He feared he knew what had happened to them. The guilt arrived not like a wave, but like weather, pervasive, without a clear origin, impossible to argue with. You could not have saved them, Shlomo said one night in the dark, as though reading his thoughts. No, Misha agreed, but you think about them. Yes, good, Shlomo said after a pause. That is how it should be. On the 12th day, Tadeusz connected them with a courier from the Armia Krajowa, the Polish underground resistance, a young woman named Agata who rode a bicycle with extraordinary confidence and spoke 4 languages and moved them east through a network of safe houses, one by one, over the course of 3 weeks. Misha was given false papers again. Stanislaw Wick, a carpenter from Noe Souch. He practiced the name until it no longer felt foreign in his mouth. He ate his first full meal in 2 years at a farmhouse in the hills east of Bochnia. A bowl of real soup, thick, with vegetables, with actual meat, and a piece of rye bread with butter. He ate it slowly, with the concentration of someone performing a sacred act. Across the table, Dora watched him and said nothing, but her eyes were full of an understanding that required no language. Small things returned like light through cracked wood, the sound of wind in birch trees, the particular color of the morning sky just before the sun cleared the ridge, the realization, arriving with a force that stopped his breath one afternoon as he stood in a field and watched a hawk describe slow circles overhead, that he was still alive, that he had not been erased, that the world, however broken, still contained hawks. He wept then, alone in the field, not from sorrow, or not only from sorrow, from something he did not have an adequate word for, from the terrible, stubborn, inexplicable fact of his own continuation. He crossed into Slovakia in late August, and from there, eventually, into Hungary, and eventually, through channels he never fully understood and was never fully told, to safety. By the time the war ended in May 1945, Mikhail Ferencz was 25 years old and felt much older. He had learned 3 things about survival that no one could have taught him beforehand: that it is partly luck and only partly will, that it carries a weight of obligation that never fully lifts, and that the living owe the dead not their own destruction, but their full and deliberate continuation. He learned in the months after liberation that Rivka had not survived. He sat with this knowledge for a long time in a small room in Prague, turning it over like a stone, looking at it from every angle, finding no angle that made it bearable. Then he stood up. He washed his face. He went outside. He was not whole. He understood he would not be whole again, not in the way that word had once meant. There were silences inside him where things had been, and those silences would remain. But he had a compass the size of a thumbnail, and a letter in his coat pocket, worn soft with handling, and the memory of a woman named Dora who had looked at 4 minutes and seen exactly enough, and an old man named Shlomo who had mapped 11 months of suffering into 1 night of freedom, and a farmer named Tadeusz who had simply kept his dead wife's faith. He thought often about Bogdan, the man with the pointing finger. He thought about him with something that was not quite hatred and not quite pity, but something in between, a kind of sorrow at what ordinary people are capable of when history gives them permission. He wrote everything down. He wrote for 3 months without stopping, in a small notebook, in handwriting that sometimes shook and sometimes did not. He wrote the names of everyone he remembered. He wrote the name of the rabbi. He wrote the name of Lev. He wrote the names of the 31 people in the transport truck, those he knew and those he had only glimpsed, because they deserved to exist in ink, even if they could no longer exist in the world. When he was finished, he held the notebook in both hands for a long moment. Then he thought of what Thaddeus had said, because she would have, and the question that remained, the one that the smoke and the wire and the years could not resolve, the one that outlasted the war and the camps and the silence in between, was not why did this happen, though God knows he asked that too. The question was simpler and more urgent and would belong to every generation that came after his own. What will you do? What will any of us do when the moment comes and someone is pointing and the choice is between the boots and the hiding place, between the finger and the door left open in the dark? He never found an answer that satisfied him. He suspected that was the point. He suspected that the question, kept alive and uncomfortable and refused the mercy of an easy answer, was itself a form of remembrance, perhaps the most honest form of all. He kept asking it for the rest of his life.